Today, I'm here with therapist, divorce coach, and co parenting expert Jill Kaufman. And I'm excited for this conversation because we're going to talk about something I think men don't hear enough about, and that's the emotional fallout of a divorce and what that journey looks like. So, divorce isn't just paperwork and custody schedules, it's grief, it's betrayal, it's an identity crisis, and most men are completely unprepared for it. Society, our parents don't give us the tools to process it. So we push it down, pretend we're fine, and then self destruct in private. So, what if grief isn't just something to survive? What if it's the key to becoming a better man, a better father, and a real leader for your kids? So, that's what we're going to talk about today. And Jill, your tagline is divorce is overwhelming. I will help you through it. I love that because holy crap, it was overwhelming. I didn't even know how to size it.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
So I'm going to focus my questions around men today, but I suspect that, both genders will need help with that emotional journey. But first of all, you wear a lot of hats: therapist, divorce coach, co parenting expert. That's a lot. How did you get here?
I actually was in banking when I first was out of college. And then I had my first child and I wanted to do something part-time. So I started teaching these parenting classes and I was trained to be a parent educator. And they always wanted to talk to me more after the parenting classes were over. And I'm like, I'm not a therapist. So then I went back and got my master's and I became a therapist. And then I went through my own divorce and it was horrible. And this is a long time ago. This is in 2012, 2013, and there weren't a lot of divorce coaches. So I just hired an attorney. I didn't know what, and I was listening to whatever she said. And I ended up figuring out myself how to get to an agreement in my divorce. And I was like, and she made me sign something that said, I don't advise you to take this agreement, to sign this agreement. And so I ended up getting trained as a mediator. So I'm actually a certified mediator. And I said, I can help people do this, much better than what's going on in the world right now. So I was like, I need to be a divorce coach. So that's how it all came about.
Makes sense. I feel like a lot of people, when they go through the journey, when they get to that healing part, that they want to help others so that they don't go through something like that as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely helpful when you can help others.
Yeah. I feel like that's something that I always think back to is how unprepared I was for the whole thing. And I left my house with nothing. I didn't get any equity from the house. I got the clothes on my back and I got another bill payment in the form of child support. And just when I was starting to get my feet under me, there was more lawyers and this problem just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. How do you help people to accept that their divorce is bigger than they expect?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people are scared of divorce, so they don't minimize it, but it's even bigger. I think a lot of people I work with are like, I've been through all these terrible things, the loss of my parents and all these other stuff, and my divorce was worse, you know? And so it really is worse than almost anything you could go through. And so I think getting as much information in preparing for this or in the beginning of it is so important, and talking to someone who has the experience and has information for you, not just an attorney, because that's what everybody does. They're like, I have to consult with an attorney. And yeah, attorneys will give you answers to legal questions, but they're not going to really help you with the emotional piece of any of this. So if you have a therapist, that's helpful. If there's a support group you can join, that's helpful. But getting as much information and understanding of what is going to happen to you emotionally would be really helpful.
When you go through a divorce, it almost feels like a bomb goes off and you're left picking up the pieces. And like you just said, the emotional side gets ignored. And I think a lot of divorced men don't think of themselves as traumatized. I can even feel myself like recoiling from that label. Like it feels like to admit that I was traumatized, I would say I feel weak with that label. And so I think a lot of men just feel angry, they feel numb or lost or just nothing at all. What are some hidden ways that trauma shows up in men's lives and especially in relationships?
Well, so avoiding the feelings is a big way, and people can avoid the feelings by one, jumping into a new relationship, which doesn't solve anything, and it could make things much more complicated. Two is, drugs, alcohol, some numbing themselves, and so they're not thinking about it or feeling anything. And, acting like everything's okay, right? And telling everybody, "Oh no, I'm okay, everything's okay," and not really reaching out for support. So people avoid dealing with the pain by one of these ways, and what happens is it's in there. I talk about it like it's a like a glass jar with the top on. The feeling is in there. If you don't take off the top, it's going to stay in there. You have to take off the top and let the feeling out, or it's not going to go away. And then it'll come out as depression. It can come out as low self-esteem. There's so many ways that people hurt themselves by not expressing and feeling the pain that they need to feel.
So it's by avoiding feeling the pain, we're going to feel it at some point, no
Well,
matter
it's
what.
going to get worse. Yeah, because it's there and you're not dealing with it.
So how do you know the difference between for myself, I feel like when I'm hurt, I have to go hide for a while. What's the difference, or how do you know the difference between healing and avoidance?
So when you say hide for a while, I mean, if you're not really ready to talk to people for a few days, a week, that's understandable. But if it gets longer than that, if you're not really interacting and or sharing for months, that's going to be avoiding, and that's really people do it for months, years, for their whole lives. They just avoid the feeling of pain because they're scared of it. And I always ask people, what are you afraid of? And a lot of times the answer is I'm afraid I'm going to lose it and not be able to get back to being in control. You know what I mean? And that doesn't happen. Like when you feel pain, when you let it out, when you cry, when you scream, when you let these feelings out, you feel better. You know, Crying actually releases a hormone that makes you feel emotionally better. So like letting out the feeling is not going to stop you from gaining control in the future. And I think that's a lot unconscious or subconsciously, not unconscious, subconsciously, people are thinking that, I'll never be able to get back my control. I'll just lose it and be a mess for the rest of my life.
So, and yeah, we're taught, I think we don't even realize how much pain and grief we're carrying. So how do you suggest even recognizing that we're carrying that trauma?
Well, going through a divorce, you're going to feel it's a loss. It's a number of losses, right? So you're going to feel the loss of time with your children, the loss of in-laws, the loss of potentially your house, the loss of other people in your life, friends that you potentially lost, the loss of status in the community. There's so many losses that, there's no way you're not grieving when you're going through divorce.
Mm.
So you have to really do something to get that out. And, whether it's traumatic or not, I mean, I think it is, traumatic in a certain way because it is such a huge impact on all different aspects of your life. But some people, some not like traumatic, it's just grief. And I think traumatic is really, I'm thinking of it in a clinical way where, you've been had some significant event that has changed the way you look at the world. You know what I mean? And it could be, a lot of times divorce is, but I just don't know that every divorce is traumatic in that way. But it's still, you're grieving and you're still dealing with a whole bunch of changes that are really difficult, really, really difficult for everybody.
I think I'm imagining those difficult divorces, like the one I went through, where it just kept getting like it was a problem this big, and then it gets this big, and then this big, and then this big. So I think I am thinking of it in terms of traumatic, because it's like it. What the way I describe my divorce is, it's almost like I had the role of a father taken away from me, and it was replaced with ATM. And I really struggled with that, and I found a lot of trauma inside myself because of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you don't have the same relationship with your children, that is traumatic, because that's a life-changing event. And, it's just semantics when I'm talking about whether it's
Okay.
traumatic or not. I think it's all significant when you're going through divorce, and you have to get help. You have to get out the feelings. You have to feel the pain. You don't have to get lost in it though. Like, you feel the pain and you feel your emotions for part. And I think for men, this is really hard because they're told, to keep everything in and stiff upper lip, and not to, and it's weak to talk about your issues. And I find that men need this, like, even more than women, because they don't necessarily have the relationships with other men that women have with other women. So they aren't talking to about this with their friends. So they need the support groups. They need the ways to work through this, the therapist or whoever it is, if they don't have those relationships with other men or women.
When I was going through it, and I went through it around the same time as you, I think 2013 to 2016, 17. It went on for a while.
Yeah.
Um, but I found I was angry. Like, I was angry when I went through it. And I felt this deep betrayal by my ex, by the system, by the friends I thought I had, who stopped being friends with me. And that I found that anger worked against me when I was going through the process, because we had lawyers involved. We had I forget what the term is, but somebody who assesses who the kids should be with.
Child study evaluation. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they picked up on my anger. Like, I didn't do anything, and yet I had all of these things that were black marks against me, and it felt like, because I didn't know how to process that anger, like that was a black mark against me.
Absolutely.
So what suggestions do you have for men in that situation who don't know how to process that anger, who don't even I don't even think I had a name for it. It was just like, it just was this feeling inside of like wanting to lash out.
Well, so the anger is part of the grief, right? It's
Hmm.
denial, bargaining, anger, sadness, and eventually acceptance. So anger is part of what you need to express. But I think a lot of men especially get stuck in anger because that's comfortable for them. That it makes sense. I have a right to be angry, and it's a masculine kind of a trait. And so, like, they'll get stuck in that anger, and they won't recognize that there's sadness underneath that anger, a tremendous amount of sadness. So, like, understanding really what you're feeling, like, yes, you're feeling angry and you're talking about that, but what's underneath that anger? There's a lot of sadness. Like, how sad were you that you had this different relationship with your children? And how sad were you that you were being blamed for things that you didn't ever do? And like, it's really, and then the denial and bargaining thing. Well, maybe if I don't think about it, it won't happen. Or maybe I get a lot of men who are like, I think, I can get her back. Like, maybe I can make this thing all right if I say the right thing, or we do something different, or we go to marriage counseling. So, like, talking about those feelings and understanding that, like, you can have those feelings, but you have to accept reality. And when you do, you have to understand why it's so hard for you. What's going on for you that is making you angry? Because sometimes there's triggers from childhood of rejection of a parent, and you feel like this rejection from this ex-spouse, and it triggers something deep down from your childhood. And that's, where you go to therapy, because then you really need to talk that through, because that's a deep wound that is being re-triggered.
So when they don't process their grief, they're almost sabotaging themselves. And um, I'd like to talk a bit about how men sabotage themselves after divorce. So I think a lot of men think they're moving on, but they're chasing women, they're drinking, they're like you mentioned before. What other ways does avoidance look like?
I mean, throwing yourself into your work is another way, just your whole life is your work. Throwing yourself into your children, which, is a little bit healthier than other ways, but like not having a life other than your children is also not healthy, right? And some people like there's been women who have left and not and the men have gotten like 100% of the custody or a significant portion of the custody and they don't have any other life other than their children. And I say this for women and men, and that's not good. That's not a balanced, healthy life. So yeah, there's a lot of ways. Anything to the extreme is probably not great.
How do you identify that extreme, that you're in the extreme?
Well, so everybody should be, they should prioritize their kids. They should prioritize their mental and physical health. They should prioritize having friendships and family who they're connected to. Like, if you don't have all of these things that give you a healthy life, you're not going to be, you're going to be avoiding something.
What's what's happening underneath avoidance?
Fear, probably. I think it's different for different people, but like probably they're afraid of facing what's going on and facing themselves and their past. There's so much you can learn from your experience, even though your marriage didn't end well, you can still learn so much from that relationship and you can learn so much about yourself and you can grow. And it's an opportunity for you to really have a better life. And they're scared of that, because it involves facing a lot of things that are scary, maybe from childhood, maybe from after childhood, maybe from their marriage, and a lot of people don't want to do that.
You're making me think of I'm rereading the book right now, Iron John, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And it talks about how your gift lies in your wound, but it takes time and patience to find it. And if you generally, if you don't go looking for it, you find yourself in almost this world where the volumes turn down, where colors are muted, and I agree with you that the trauma in divorce is different for everybody, but it's, I think, your job to look for it. It's almost, there's a saying, I'm obsessed with this saying right now. Don't have to you don't have to finish the work, but you can't avoid it. And I love that because it talks to intergenerational trauma in that something from your childhood caused you to get into this divorce, usually, sometimes. And then if you don't address it, you're passing it down to your kids.
Right. Oh, that's so true. And yeah, I mean, in my situation, my parents were married till my dad died over 50 years, and they had a terrible marriage. And so I didn't know what a healthy marriage looked like. And, I met my first husband and 10 months later we were engaged and we hardly knew each other. I was 24 when we met. And like, we were young. I hardly knew him. And I was making this decision because I didn't realize how significant that decision was, because I had parents who just stayed together no matter what. And like a lot of my friends who came from divorced parents, they have like amazing marriages, first marriages, because they knew this decision is one of the most important decisions I can make. And they took their time getting to know. And even my kids, now that they've been through parents being divorced, two of my kids have been with their partners 6 years, more than 6 years. They're living together and they're not talking about marriage because they're waiting and they know it's an important decision.
I've heard it's the number one most important decision you will make
Yep.
because your partner will boost you up or they will drag you down.
Yep.
And It's funny. I'm pretty sure my oldest, when I was going through the divorce process, I could feel him judging me as I went through it. And I think he was angry at me on how I processed it. And his very first girlfriend, he had a horrible breakup with her. Like she took stole one of his hoodies, burned it on Instagram live, had her friends harass him, like basically what I went through. And it was like, if you don't process that, if you don't understand where, um, how do I say this, what somebody goes through, if you judge somebody, then you're going to go through it probably. So it was interesting to see his second girlfriend, how careful he was with the second girlfriend.
He learned.
He learned.
Yeah.
Okay, so if a man realizes he's been sabotaging himself, what are some things he can do to break out of it?
So, I mean, there's so many things you can do. There are books you can read. You can journal, yourself. Journaling is a great tool. Not everybody, benefits from it, but if you like it, it's a great tool. Also, support groups. There's a ton of support groups out there. Therapy, coaches. There's a ton of coaches for whatever it is that you're struggling with. And I don't coach people after their divorce, but there are coaches for that. And it's a commitment. It's wanting things to be better, wanting your life to be better, and recognizing this is an opportunity to have a better life. And yes, you can be stuck in the negative and the sadness and the frustration, or you can say, I'm not going to let this hold me back. I am going to figure out what went wrong and move forward and have a great life. Your kids are watching if you have kids, right? Your kids are watching you when you were so angry, right? They didn't love that. So
They
like
picked
if
up
you
on it way
right,
more than I thought they would.
right. And so if you can't do this for yourself, do this for your kids because your kids want a happy parent. They don't want someone who's angry or depressed or not living their life. They need to see you happy. It really is helpful for children because or else they'll feel responsible for you and they won't get the strength that you can show them. If you role model strength, they will get that from you. If you need motivation, think about your kids no matter what age they are. If they're little or if they're grown, they will really love it if you're succeeding and happy and having a great life.
Yeah, well, let's talk about kids. And I strongly believe one of the sayings I borrow and overuse is put your own oxygen mask on first. So agreeing with you, what does that look like? What does it look like for a father to put his own oxygen mask on first?
Well, it's so if you have minor children and you have them for a certain percent of the time, you want to be as present and available as you possibly can when you get your children, right? So let's say there's a 50-50 custody. During the 50% of the time you don't have your children, you should be taking care of yourself. That means exercising, that means eating right, sleeping well, getting work done as much as you can, um, seeing friends, family, doing all the things you can on the time that you don't have your children so that when you have your kids, you can be there for them. It doesn't mean like, when you have your children, go have fun because you need to have a good life. It means that, it's not like you can't leave your children ever, but when you have them, if you don't have them 100% of the time, really appreciate that time and focus on them. So take care of yourself during that other time that you have.
I struggled with, um, uh, so I had my kids from Tuesday to Wednesday, no, Wednesday. I don't remember now. It's been so long, but it basically was like a 6 day run. And then I didn't have them for 8 days.
Right.
And that last day I was with them, always like the house always felt empty and cold. And I was always a little depressed, well, varying degrees of depressed after. And the thing I had to force myself to do was make the time when they were away almost more fun than the time when they were there.
Yep.
So that's when my partner and I would travel, or we would go do something out of the ordinary.
Yeah. No, that's a great example of, doing things when you're not with them so you can focus on them when you're with them. And kids know, like kids know if you're distracted, kids know if you're angry, kids know if you're depressed, and they feel it. So the more you can do to get yourself in a good state when you see them, the better it is for them, obviously for you too.
One thing I always suggest to men, to fathers, is become your kid's superhero. So when you are not with them, go do the things that would make you into that superhero. So, like you're saying, go to the gym. I would lift weights or box, but I would always try to bring back a story of something crazy that I've done that gives the impression that I'm living this big life that they always were like, wow, dad, or how did you do that? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
So that worked really well.
Yeah. No, it is. Um, it's amazing. I always tell married couples, I also do marriage counseling a little bit. And I say that, I think marriages would do better if they only had their kids 50% of the time. Because, it is hard to have kids 100% of the time. And so there's some positives about not having your kids 100% of the time. It's hard. You're right. It's very lonely, like
Yeah.
especially in the beginning when your kids aren't in your house and it's quiet, but then you realize that, wow, I can go watch this movie if I want to, or I can go for a walk, like there's this freedom that if you allow yourself to really enjoy, um it's a great balance.
Well, speaking of the emotion, underneath that depression that I experienced, I think I had guilt around enjoying being alone. And I hate to admit that, but I was sad that I wasn't with them and that there was this wall between me and them. But yeah, I was kind of happy I had that freedom, and I hate to admit that.
There's nothing to feel guilty about. Like your guilt is, a lot of people feel that way. And it's like, you shouldn't feel guilty though, because it's normal for you to be kind of relieved that you don't have. I mean, kids are hard, right? Kids aren't easy, especially teenagers. But like all kids, they've got it's such a difficult job that you don't get any real accolades for. You don't get a raise, you don't get awards, like your kids aren't going to thank you when you teach them something and have a consequence. So it's like, it's very hard to have that all the time, and having, a life without all of that difficulty is nice. And so if you can do that and then go back and be a better parent, that's the best of all worlds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it look like when a father leads from his wounds? So when he is leading from that depression rather than wisdom.
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to people. You know, like people
Well, it
on
may
the
be obvious
outside,
from the outside, but not from the inside.
not from the inside. I mean, like, look, you're going to be struggling, right? No matter what. You're going through divorce or you're already divorced, and there's a ton of things that you're dealing with. But if it's like a struggle every day, all day, there if there's no joy, if you can't get yourself out of the muck of being angry and sad and frustrated, that's a red flag. You got to get help. You can't keep going like that for more than a couple months. Like there is help out there, right? You don't have to do this on your own. And that's what I think for men especially, they think they should do this on their own. I shouldn't need help. It's just divorce. Everybody goes through divorce. What's the big deal? I can handle this. But guess what? Not everybody goes through divorce on their own. Most people get help. Most people are not able to handle this without getting some kind of support and help. And so, definitely, don't wait too long. I would get help as soon as possible, even if you don't think you need it. Get help. One of the things we've talked about, because you can always stop. You can always start with a therapist and say, you know what? I don't need this. I'm good. But to wait and just, suffer, there's just no reason to do that.
Well, I think with a lot of men I've spoken to, there's almost this stigma to asking for help. Like they should do it themselves. They should know, but if you're never taught, how are you expected to know to do that?
No, and I think that's part of the reason that marriages get into trouble in the first place, right? Because they don't get help usually,
Right.
or they come to the marriage counselor too late when there's already so much anger and resentment in the marriage. So like, you know, don't make that mistake after your marriage, after your divorce, get help. That's one really huge opportunity for growth, is to recognize that, help is something that you should look for. Do you know what I mean? You need to, we all need some kind of help, and you just got to figure out what's best for you. What's the kind of help that's going to help you?
What are some, I should have asked this a few minutes ago, but I'm just thinking of it now. What are some of the traits of men who lead their families well even after a divorce?
So, and I've worked with a ton of men who have amazing traits as fathers and, ex-spouses. It's basically being respectful to the other parent, and this goes both ways, right?
Of
The
course.
mom should be this way to the father too. But really, no matter what's happened between the two of you, you are the relationship between parents, whether they're divorced or together, is the single most biggest factor in a child being okay after, in their life. And so it's not the divorce that's going to hurt your children, but it's the relationship between the two parents. And yes, there are some people who are super difficult to be respectful with as ex spouses, but you can only do what you can do, right? You can only control what you do. So if you are respectful, and there are a lot of techniques to actually work with high conflict people where you are lowering the conflict and not making it worse. So I would highly recommend you learning about this. I don't know if you probably know Jeff, Bill Eddy.
I don't. And that's exactly what I was just writing down. So what are some of the techniques?
Okay, so
And I know you and I talked about the BIF method, I think.
yes, so Bill Eddy, EDDY, has a high conflict institute in California, and he developed this technique called the BIF method. And you're brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So you're friendly when you're communicating, but you are firm in your boundaries. So an example would be, I'd like to take Sally to my office party on Friday, even though it's your parenting time, has been there every year in the past, and she always looks forward to it. Please let me know by Wednesday at 5 p.m. if she can go. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume that you are in agreement that I can take her, and you can get time after. We can switch time. So and thank you so much. I really appreciate working together for the good of our children, whatever it is. So you really want to be friendly, but you also want to set boundaries. You don't want to just leave it open-ended, like, let me know if it's okay, because you're never gonna, a lot of people will just not respond to that. So you really have to give them some like deadlines and understandings that if they don't get back to you, you're going to make an assumption. So that's one method. And basically, you know, walk away if you find that your ex or soon to be ex is provoking you and is trying to start a fight, or you don't have to engage. You can say, you know what, let's talk another time. And, or, in email, you respond only to the things that are necessary. I actually, there's a parenting app, a co-parenting app called Best Interests, and it will change the texts and the emails to only the facts. It'll take out all of the other stuff that's inappropriate, so you will only see the facts. And there's a lot of apps coming up now that are really helpful with co-parenting. So I would look into those tools.
That sounds a lot like gray rocking, only a little friendlier. And for anybody who doesn't know, gray rocking is the act of being, it's named that because of you don't want to give an emotional reaction. So you want to be as uninteresting as any pebble on a beach.
Right.
And so basically, you're just responding with very factual things. And it's interesting that There's that app that only replies with um, facts. I could have used that about 10, 15 years ago.
Yes, I know all these apps are coming now that are really helpful with AI and everything.
Yeah, just take out the emotions. So yeah, the and it's interesting that the Biff method suggests assuming positive, like a positive response, like just assuming that they're going to say yes, and you'll figure out how to exchange that. I think I in my head I just got into my ex saying no to everything.
Yeah, but at least you'll get a response, right?
Hmm.
Or else you'll have to say, I mean, you're taking a risk actually if you say that they still won't let the child go. So it probably makes sense to say, if I don't hear from you by Wednesday at 5, I'll assume you're not in agreement, because you don't want to get into that where you tell your child that, "Oh, you can go to my event," but then the parent says no. You have to play it safe when it comes to your children. You don't want to put them in the middle at all.
Do you have tips on helping a man reclaim his role as father, especially if he only has his kids like every other weekend, or, every other Wednesday, something like that? What tips do you have for that?
Well, so even if you don't have parenting time, you can have interactions with your kids, and I would do like a game with them depending upon their ages. Like if your son is into sports and he's a teenager, talk about the game. Did you see the game? What, like text during the game. If you have a younger child, there's all these online games like Scrabble. You could play with them. You could FaceTime. I mean, depending upon a lot of kids don't want to sit there on FaceTime with their parent, but playing games with them is really a wonderful way to have an interaction. So they're thinking about you, they know you're thinking about them, in between the times that you see them. And then when you see them, talk about that between the times. Say, what do you want to do on Saturday afternoon? We have some free time. We could do XYZ. So really engage children however you can engage them, because children are not like adults. They're not going to sit and have a 5 to 10 minute conversation with you. They'll play a game with you, like, so really try to get into their world as much as possible.
I was a little sneaky with mine. I put my kids into hockey. I'm Canadian. Put my kids into hockey in the winter and soccer in the summer. So it became this natural thing that Saturday morning they had a game and everybody would go to the game, including the grandparents. So it was a nice way to kind of break up that time we weren't with them.
Yeah, no, that's another thing. If they're in, a sport, go to the sporting, even the practice you can probably go to, or in the play, go to the play, you know what I mean? So like, yeah, that's really great for being able to see them in between times.
Um, oh, I ran
There you are.
I ran out of okay. I'll have to cut this part. Cut this part. For a man listening right now who feels lost and he wants to stand up, what are some things he can start doing? No, I already asked that. All right, cut this part too. Um, what are some ways that fathers can teach their kids emotional resilience as they go through this without burdening them too much with the struggles, like keeping it light? How do you do that?
So, a lot of times parents will lecture children. They'll think that they have to tell them things because they're only seeing them a certain amount of time and they have to get it all in. But actually, children need to talk. So, getting kids to talk is teaching them resilience. So, ask them questions. How are you feeling about this? What best part of your day? What's the worst part of your day? How do you feel about going to two different houses? Like a lot of parents don't want to ask that because they don't want to hear, like that it's hard. But having them talk about even the bad stuff is part of what you're teaching, that it's okay to talk about it, that you're okay for them to talk to. And so really getting children to talk and feel comfortable talking is really helpful with teaching them resilience. I have like a bunch of questions that I can share with your audience if you want
Yeah,
to
that'd
ask.
be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine, how do you suggest talking to the kids about the new situation? Like two houses now.
Well, so this is what
Or
a
the
lot
same
of
way.
people, yeah, a lot of people don't really understand the way kids think about things. So they are like, should I bring them to the house before we actually move in? What should I say to them? But like, kids get excited about those things, Oh, it's a new house. I get a new room. I get to like do put things in my new room. So you can be really positive about those things instead of, are you okay? You shouldn't like immediately think, oh, is this terrible? Are you really struggling? You don't want to like put that in their head. You want to make it into a positive experience, like especially as you move into two different places, and really ask them what they want in their rooms and what they're excited about and what would make it fun. And, so you want to be more positive during those things because kids are really, they get excited about that.
I guess, yeah, you're right. Thinking back, what kind of bed do you want? And then you go to IKEA and pick out the bed and pick out a desk and
A
everything.
comforter and yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some good ways for fathers to set boundaries with their ex? I didn't let my ex in my house. I didn't feel comfortable with her there. I didn't want her, looking at my things and seeing where I was at. How do you set those boundaries while still trying to maintain a good relationship with your kids and providing that stability?
I think it's very individual. There are some people as co-parents that can go into each other's houses and they're very comfortable and they're very respectful, and that's great. So, it really depends on the person, and a lot of people do want to put up those boundaries. And so talk to them about it. Say, for right now, we really need each other's permission if we want to go into the other person's house. You can't just walk in with the children because that's my house, and we're not living together anymore. We're not going to be married. So you really have to ask me if you want to go in if I'm not there. And even if I'm there for pickups and drop offs, we're not going to go into each other's house. It's just going to be harder for the kids if we do that. So I would have those conversations way before the first time you do that. If you need someone to help you have those conversations, this is something I do with people. I do co-parenting, coaching and counseling. And so there are professionals that will help you guys you can have like one or two sessions with them and they'll help you come up with rules that will be for all the times that you would be going into each other's houses and pickups and drop-offs and those kinds of things.
I imagine I imagine you can have a pretty good list. You must have a common list of those sort of rules for a lot of parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is different for everybody. So you're going to be making your own, but it's about like, transitions, like when you drop off or pick up a child, or, when in the beginning, when you first have a new place. Once you get used to it, people are better about it, but like all the beginning things that you need to do together, you should have rules.
Before we wrap up, I have a question I like to ask everybody. You've been through a divorce. I've been through a divorce. One thing I try to look for is not to put toxic positivity on it, but what are you genuinely grateful for having gone through that process?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I I'm grateful that I was able to turn around you know, a failed marriage and then really change my life to what I wanted it to be. I'm remarried. I have stepkids. I didn't remarry right away. I always tell people don't rush into that. I took a lot of time to heal and to work on myself and to spend time with my kids and put my kids as a priority. And, I'm just so grateful for my relationship with my kids today. And, for being able to have a second chance at my life and redoing what what a lot of people don't have a chance. They're either too scared to get out of the situation. Let's say 50% of the marriages end in divorce. Those 50% that are not divorced, not all of them are happy. right? A lot of people are staying in their marriages even though they're not happy, like my parents, not happy marriages. And like I, I'm so happy and grateful that I wasn't, you know, that didn't happen to me.
Agreed. And I'm very similar. I have a great relationship with my kids now. I'm teaching my oldest how to invest now, and so every day we're exchanging like, "Oh man, did you see what this stock did last night?" And I never thought I would be having that conversation with my kids, but
That's awesome.
it's kind of fun. Where can people find you if they want to learn more or they want to work with you?
So my website is divorcecoachjill.com. I also have a free Facebook group, separation and divorce support community, and I'm an Instagram divorce coach Jill at divorce coach Jill.
And I'll have links to that. So thank you very much, Jill. This was really enlightening, and I think it's really important to have these conversations, especially I'm on the men's, not on the men's side. I don't mean to say that, but I want to have more of these kind of conversations around that emotional journey of divorce. So
Thank you so
thanks for having
much,
me.
Jeff. Thank you.